Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to our 111th Right and Left Discussion Forum. We hold our televised discussion panels twice monthly to demonstrate the value of civil, productive, open-minded political discussion. Keep in mind that civil and open-minded does not mean that we all agree. If it did, it would not be productive. Today, our panel will discuss the Kennedy assassination files. Our panel today, beginning on my left, is Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services. On his left is Jerry Ritzman, co-founder of Ritzman Pharmacies. On his left is Patty Haskins, retired math teacher and member of the Wadsworth City Council. Bryan, in the 54 years since President Kennedy was assassinated, there have been 7 different commissions, panels, committees, and acts of Congress dealing with the Kennedy assassination and the handling of more than 5 million pages of documents. Still, the public has yet to receive the full story on the assassination. What would you like to see happen?
I think it's time for complete disclosure. It's been long enough that whatever situations might have occurred or issues surrounding this terrible tragedy those people are gone now, and I think the best thing to do is to open up the files and let people read them and come away with their own opinions. There's nothing really that we can do about it. Maybe improve some things, but we've come a long way since 54 years ago, and I think it's time that the public has an opportunity to see the amount of effort that went into investigating this and draw their own conclusions from it.
Do you think that after all this time that it's even possible to develop a consensus no matter what's in the files?
No, and I think the sad state of where we're at today, it seems as though we want to go back and somehow change history, and there are things in history that we're not proud of, and we just have to recognize that and try to do better. That's the hard part about trying to revise history and to make it fit our current our current ideas of what it was like or should have been like, and I just don't think that's helpful. History is filled with lots of situations that we're certainly not proud about, but we can't beat ourselves up, continue to beat ourselves up about it. So I think we should just let the public draw their own conclusions, let them go through it, and look at it as a piece of history.
How about you, Jer? What are you thinking?
Well, I'll draw a parallel here. I feel there should be total release of all the documents, full disclosure, and let them out there. No more commissions, no more study groups, anything like that. And the parallel that I draw is that there's a new biography out of Ulysses S. Grant. I think it's like a 500 or 600 or 1,000 page book. I don't know how many people will read it. But it puts him in a totally different light, or a much different light, than many of the previous biographies or studies of Ulysses S. Grant's life.
Mainly by Mark Twain.
And so if we put the Kennedy assassinations documents out there, there will be skilled researchers, investigators who will look at it and draw some possible conclusions from it. And there may be different conclusions drawn by skilled investigators and writers and historians and so forth. And because we will never be able to recreate the exact scene, the exact time when that took place, and we'll have to move ahead from that. And people are going to have their own opinions. It'll do big damage to the film industry for all the conspiracy theories and films and books about the conspiracy things. And I just say that tongue in cheek, but it should get out there. It should let the public and the professionals beat it up and come to different conclusions and present different evidence. Because I think that you could probably, if you looked at all the evidence but only focused on certain things, you could draw a tremendous conspiracy theory, or you could draw your conclusions to be just a one-person action, all types of things. It just depends on what you focus on, and it needs to be out there, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Patty, do you remember the assassination?
Yeah.
Are you old enough?
Yes.
You
I
are.
was in 9th grade, sitting in Latin class, and they announced it over the PA that he had been shot. And it was the next to the last period of the day. And then I went to my last period class, which was science. And this is why, I could not tell you any other schedule, but that one I remember. And we were in science class when they announced that he had passed. So yes, I do remember it quite well. So, it's interesting. All of this has come to light recently because of the 1992 legislation that required that all of the documents be released on, and the date was given in October, and I can't remember the exact date now that it was. Just 27th. There was a clause within that legislation which stated that certain entities would have the right to hold back certain things if they felt they were for national security reasons, which is why the FBI and the CIA have put forth some documents. The thing is, it shouldn't have been a surprise that this was coming. I mean, it's been 25 years since the legislation was passed, but unfortunately, the administration had not, and I'm not complaining about this or criticizing, but they had not taken the time to go through these exceptions that were put on the table and said, well, we'll wait and we'll do it in April. Now, the reason I say I'm not going to use that as criticism is because I think administration has had a great deal of other things on their plate which were more pressing issues at this time, and perhaps maybe that's why they had not gotten to it. But it should have been out, and now we're supposed to see the rest of it in April. From what I've heard, one of the reasons some of the material has still been withheld is it's thought that perhaps that there were security issues or names that they did not wish to get out there for, to understand, for example, how certain security issues are handled. They did not want certain names released either because the person is still alive, or it might hurt their reputation, or perhaps the family may object to that. So there are some legitimate reasons to hold back. Of course, there have been conspiracy theories since the beginning. I'm not sure that these documents are going to solve any of these conspiracy theories, because people are going to believe what they want to believe. As you said, people will look at certain things, and I remember the Zapruder film when it first came out. One of the big things was that I believe Kennedy was shot from the back of the head, but then his head snapped back, and people saw that and said, "Oh, there's another shooter. He must have been shot from the front." Well, yeah, and then they've gone through all of that and said, "No, that is perfectly legitimate for what happened." I just recently saw Geraldo Rivera, who at the time was covering this, and he was I think he was the one who came up with the Zapruder film. It was brought to him and he showed it for the first time, and he was talking about this and saying, no, that's not really a problem. There were concerns that Lee Harvey Oswald had gone to Mexico to the Russian embassy to obtain a passport. And the question was, why didn't he just go to the Russian embassy in Washington, D.C.? Why did he have to go to Mexico? And there were concerns that this is one of the conspiracies, that he was meeting with Russian agents or Cuban agents or whatever there, and he had to go to Mexico to do this. There is a concern that, and I'm thinking, boy, if that was true, they would have had this out. But they said, well, no, it could hurt relationships with Russia, with Cuba, with Mexico if this were brought out. so unfortunately, that just gives all the tinfoil hat wearers more cause to say that there was a conspiracy. Of course, there was a conspiracy that Jack Ruby was involved, and I think he did have mafia ties, if I'm not mistaken. There was some concern about that it was the mafia that put a hit out on him, and that was why he was killed.
You can explain tinfoil hats to me some other time. However,
I understood it.
You understand it, don't you?
I got it.
Yes.
that one went over my head, I think. No, but let me ask you this. They released 2,800 pages.
Right.
And they've been gone over very, very carefully by...
2,800?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, last week.
Okay.
And that they've been gone over very carefully by a lot of different journalists who have summarized what's been on them. And when I think about those 2,800 pages, along with 5 million in total pages, the reason they haven't been released, the reason that we've been given, is national security.
Right.
And I went over the summaries of all these journalists that looked at the 2,800 pages.
They couldn't find anything.
Couldn't see anything at all that related to national security. Now, there were embarrassing things, like Kennedy and Robert and John taking part in wild parties at Peter Lawford's house in Malibu.
Oh, that was known before, though, too.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
But
I'm looking at the 2,800 and asking, why have these been held up?
It is questionable. I think at the time, maybe some of the things that were in there that were embarrassing weren't known. So they thought, well, we'll hold those back. There's no reason to put that out there. There may be some nexus between those and the, how many is it that are still out there? Was it 283 or 400 some that are still being withheld? And Trump has said they're going to, I think he gave the date of April 26th that he'll release.
It started off being in the coming weeks. That's a lot of weeks.
Well, I heard April, it was shortly changed to April 26th that he might release them. I think there are so many things now that we know about that at the time were not known. Obviously we are a much more transparent society, with all of the media sources that we have and all of the technology that we have. At the time, they perhaps did not have all of that, so they were still trying to keep things secret in some way, shape, or form. I mean, there was also, the concern, one of the concerns was that Johnson was behind it. And
I don't think that theory has been entirely put to rest, has it?
No, there's still people that believe that. And really, Johnson and Kennedy did not like each other.
Yeah.
They were not friendly. I'm actually interested to see that new movie on Johnson that Woody Harrelson is in.
Yeah.
It was. I saw him do an interview on that, and he said he was not a fan of Johnson because of the time. Johnson was Vietnam War and all of this and that and the other thing, and he was not a supporter of the war. But he said
this is Woody Harrelson.
Harrelson is playing
Yeah,
Johnson in the movie, and he said, after I got into the part and learned, he said, I really had a lot of respect for the man. There may have been things I didn't agree with, but there were a lot of good things that he did. But, that's beside the point. But that's another one of those theories. I don't think we're going to find anything in any of these documents that's going to prove any of these outlandish theories, though.
One of the things that really concerns me is the use of the classification stamp anyway.
Right, right.
And that thinking back to the Nixon administration, there were stories about him putting the top secret stamp on newspaper editorials. Think about that for a minute.
Because he didn't want them to be read by anybody.
He didn't like what they said, so put the stamp on them. But the using the excuse of national security to cover up all kinds of
I agree. And I think
embarrassments and illegal
that was
activities.
done in the past. And if you want to, put the conspiracies to bed, finally, well, I don't think you ever will, because there will be those, you mentioned picking and
there's
choosing
still
the information.
conspiracy theories about Lincoln.
Yeah. So, there are going to be those, but to at least make that attempt, release them, and let's see what's in them.
It's hard to recreate a moment in time.
Right.
You know, everything that was going on back then, where these different conspiracy theories take root. You know, you have President Kennedy's brother was the Attorney General. There's the organized crime conspiracy. There's the grassy knoll conspiracy, because Lee Harvey Oswald, given the dynamic of hitting a target that's on the move, and
they haven't been able to replicate the shot.
Yeah.
And they've tried. They've actually taken sharpshooters into that spot.
People that were actually trained and you know, with the equipment that he had to hit to hit President Kennedy with the with the kill shot like that was just, you know, they can't duplicate it. So all those particular things, and so that's where I fall down on the thing where fall on the side of just get it out there. You know, let's start seeing some of those, you know, digitize them so they can be searched, and people can draw their own conclusions, and let's have the historians go in and just, you know, beat each other up over all this stuff, so we can really see and recreate sort of that moment in time. But it's really hard to do that because we weren't there. Patty was in 9th grade. I'm not sure if she really understood the dynamics. I was 4 years old. I don't know what was going.
I was a precocious child.
Yes, you know what was going on back then between the dynamics within the Democratic Party and Johnson. You know, I've read several things about him, and actually visited his ranch in Texas. I think I mentioned that sometime ago.
You did, yeah.
Visited his ranch. He had an airstrip built on government money where they could fly that little jet in. I mean, he was larger than life. He was the president, and he made sure everybody understood that. And he would take interviews while he was on the commode. You know, he had reporters that he didn't really like. So when we talk about things that are happening today, they happened in the past. It's just that nobody wrote about them. There wasn't the 24-hour news cycle where someone said, yeah, he brought in the guy from NBC that wrote that article, and he said, okay, you got 5 minutes, and he's sitting there on the commode, you know, giving the interview. Now, how embarrassing is that? You know what I'm saying? But it's fact. It's not anything that anybody's saying, oh, that was just sort of folklore or anything. So I think it's really hard getting back to creating that moment in time.
Yeah, there was one thing that I heard recently. Remember the pictures of Jackie Kennedy crawling out on the trunk of the limo? And it always looked like she was trying to help the Secret Service guy to get into the car. But
she was
recently,
grabbing for a piece of his head.
Yeah,
Yes.
that was on the trunk. Think about that for a minute. How did the piece of his head get on behind him on the lid of the... You know, I went to Dealey Plaza, and I walked around. I walked around on the grassy knoll and all of that, and learned absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
Well, weren't there supposed to be autopsy pictures and all of that in these files as well?
Well, there were, you know, from one of the articles I read, talked about how the president's body was examined afterwards in Dallas, in Washington, D.C., at Bethesda, and so forth. Different people or different teams examined different wounds, exit wounds, entry wounds, and ignored others, and did not, you know, they examined this one, but not this one. And I didn't go into real depth about it, but it seemed that, you know, there's not one, you'd have to piece all those together, but there were things that were possibly missed in the examination, and I don't know if there's any, you know, other, you know, put all those records together and see what they would conclude. But again,
I think in hindsight, are we going to, what good will it do to find these little details out? And I know it's important to have the truth, and what we need to remember is that this was a tragic event. It had a profound influence upon the country. Think how things might have been different had Kennedy stayed in office and Johnson.
Would there have been a Vietnam War?
Well, it was already starting with him.
With 60,000 advisors
but
at the time he was,
how would he have proceeded with this? You know, the effect upon history. If there was another shooter, and that's a big if, that person is, I would assume, is probably deceased by this point, or to know that perhaps Russia was involved. How does that, what do we do about that today? Does that put us in a better position in relationships with Russia? Does it mean that we have to take action now that we find out 50-some years later? I'm not sure of the benefit of knowing everything. Because, as I said, there are those that are going to always believe that there was a conspiracy.
But what harm would be done?
Pardon me?
What harm would be done letting out all 5 million pages unredacted? What harm could, I mean, we need to know something about how we are governed.
I don't think that there's the harm by letting it out there. I'm just not sure of the benefit of it. That's my point. How will that change political thought now? How will that change how we communicate with other foreign governments? Will it change the way we deal with assassins within our country now? Would the way we dealt or handled that situation make a difference in the way we deal with the man who drove the truck on the bike lane in New York the day before yesterday? I don't know that it will.
I would like to think it would make a difference in how we level with the American people about what our government is doing. I think that it's important that we rebuild some kind of trust that we don't have right now. I've always thought that Washington was preoccupied with security, secret, top secret.
It's sort of like, for me, the issue, and I sort of agree with Patty on this, is that you know where does it end? And I'm all for transparency, but sometimes it's, you know, I think of the the Wizard of Oz when they finally pull the curtain back and there's a little guy in there pulling things. I think sometimes that's what the government is afraid of. That if we pull the curtain back, we're going to see things.
God help us if we learn the truth about what our government does.
Because they've invested so heavily in this image that if for some reason there's something in those documents that tarnishes the image or opens up the curtain that people can actually see. Also that back then forensically we are so far ahead of, as far as scientific stuff, and forensics and that. I mean, they were in sort of the infancy of trying to determine. So it doesn't surprise. I don't think it surprises me that when they did an autopsy, they just focused on, one thing. Why bother down here? They're not looking at the complete picture and the tools that we have today. And I don't think we can take those tools and apply them today because, like I said, that moment in time. It's very hard to recreate that and to dissect it.
Yeah, but we have a government that expresses outrage over internal corporate documents not being released and covering up corporate wrongdoing. We're just outraged at that. But we do the same thing with government. We just cover up things that are inconvenient and might be embarrassing, might affect somebody's next re-election campaign. That's what bothers me. I remember back a long time ago, I'm guessing in the 70s, there was a turncoat spy, whatever, in the U.S. government that was arrested and imprisoned because he had sold documents to the Soviet Union on how to build a quiet propeller for a submarine. And I remember the different politicians talking about what a tremendous threat to national security it was that the Russians were going to have the U.S. technology on how to build a quiet running propeller for a submarine. And this was supposed to threaten our national security for decades to come. The guy was thrown in jail. We'd never heard of it again. I wondered at the time, what difference does that make if a submarine with a hammer and sickle on the side runs just as quiet as ours? How big of a thing can that be? But I think that Washington is preoccupied with this stuff, particularly the CIA. And it's like I say, Nixon taking public editorials and putting the secret stamp on them. But that's my big concern, is that we have a government that we tolerate keeping tremendous secrets just to avoid political embarrassment.
Well, maybe the way to counter that, John, is to, we see so many Senate investigation panels, or, the Congress is investigating certain corporations or organizations or that type of thing, and they have subpoena power, and they can haul these guys and ladies and men and ladies up there and grill them, for days at a time. Maybe we need a citizens investigation panel of some particular senators or representatives that has subpoena power and can put these guys on the hot seat for 3 to 5 days.
I thought about
Like a
it.
special prosecutor.
And then in their preliminary remarks to the person that they're investigating, of course, they almost always state their conclusion beforehand of what they're going to find, and then they just hammer them. So maybe that's what we need. And they spend so much time on these investigations and these hearings, and you wonder, what are the results of them? There's other stuff they should be focusing and spending their energy on.
I'd love to hear the question. Do you now, or have you ever known Martha Stewart?
Right, yeah.
She went to jail, not for lying to Congress, which everybody does, that goes up there. She was lying to an investigator. She went to jail, for 6 months for doing that? Anyway, I've often been confused about that.
But she made saw some beautiful things that she made in prison.
Yeah, she did.
You got to work it in the kitchen, right?
Yeah.
License plates with a little bit of a Martha Stewart flair.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, folks. It was an interesting discussion. I don't think we've solved anything,
No.
No.
but we didn't intend to.